He was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he had placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to God. If you've been with us for the last few weeks on this little road trip where Jesus led the disciples up to the regions of Tyre, Heckengon up there in the middle of nowhere, into Gentile country, and had a little change of plan and change of heart, and then back down to the Decapolis, where in the center of secular worship, Jesus turns to the disciples and says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter, of course, gets his A+ and then screws up. You all remember how that works? When Jesus says, "And here's what that means," and Peter says, "Oh, I don't think so." And Jesus preaches to himself and says, "Get behind me, Satan. This is how it's going to have to be. Not the way you human minds want it. It's got to be this way." So, when you heard the beginning of this gospel today, you might have said, "Bruce, did you lose your place? Didn't we just hear that last week?" Well, yes, we did. We did hear that last week. But the thing about that message is, it takes a little getting used to. And as it said here, Jesus doesn't want anyone to know they're there because he's busy teaching the disciples what, in fact, this means. But what we have missed here is also kind of important, because between Peter's getting it sort of right and hearing the same lesson again today that the Son of Man must, some kind of important things have happened. Peter, James, and John have been with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. They've seen Jesus glowing white, talking to Moses and Elijah. That could make an impression. They've come down the mountain and found the other disciples who've been trying to cast out a demon, and things are not going well. So Jesus has to step in and say, "All right, you need a little more faith here, guys," and cast out the demon. And I think that's kind of important, because I think that's what's going on as these disciples are trudging down the dirt behind Jesus, and each in their own head is going, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest or greatest or most important?" Because we might not all look in mirrors while we do it. Oh, some of us do, probably, but I try to avoid mirrors. It's a self-preservation thing. I like to keep my delusions intact. But we all do that. Somebody tell me I'm a little bit better. Somebody tell me I'm more special. It's how we're made. It's how we need to feel. And unfortunately, we often do it in a kind of destructive way. We often do it by comparing with those walking the walk with us. And I'm here to tell you that some of this conversation was probably John. Could have been Peter, but might have been James, but I think it was John, saying, "We were on the mountain. We saw Jesus glowing, and Moses was there. You weren't there." And then you have those who weren't there going, No, we were at the bottom of the mountain. We were trying to do what we're supposed to do, and it didn't work well. We're such failures. It's all comparative and relative, isn't it? And unfortunately, we all have a tendency to use that comparison to try to make ourselves feel better, even when we're the ones who can't get the demon out. We find somebody else who's failed even more and say, yeah, but I'm better than that. I hope. But I think that's maybe what was going on here. And some leftover, well, when the Messiah, our picture of the Messiah, comes into power, we're going to have some important positions and maybe pick up some possessions. Because then, just like now, that's what greatness is to most of us. It comes down to the 3 P's. Power, position, possessions. If you have the power to get the position, you're guaranteed you're going to pick up some possessions. That's greatness, right? But as they're not answering, Jesus, of course, knows what the conversation has been. And he says, all right, let me set you straight. And he sits down. When the rabbi sits, there's going to be teaching going on. Those are the rules. And it starts with the lesson. And his lesson is, if you're going to follow me, you got to get this straight. The first will be last, and the servant of all. What does that mean? It's not exactly what they had in mind. But if we look in this little lesson, he's laid it out. And then he uses the demonstration, which is the second part. Usually the rabbi has a demonstration. And he takes this child and says, this is important. You welcome those like this. Now, those like this are those utterly without power. I realize that here in the 21st century, some of our children are more empowered than others, especially those with indulgent grandparents. But ultimately, as I told the kids at St. Paul, all right, what do you guys get to decide? And they're going, not much. Going, exactly. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. Those utterly without position, power, or possessions. The little child. And this is an important demonstration. But what he's connecting, I think, or what we could connect, maybe they couldn't, maybe the disciples couldn't. But let's talk about this when he says, those who welcome ones like this child welcome me. But not just me, but the one who sent me. Now we get down to the important part. We get down to where God says it's time for a face-to-face. It's time for an intervention. It's time to make a covenant that sticks on both sides. And God sends God's self to walk among us, but arriving as a helpless baby. You don't get more helpless than a human baby. In the animal kingdom, babies come out a little bit helpless and they pick up steam rather quickly, because if they don't, they're going to die. Our children, from way back, take a long time. And a village to get where they need to go. And Jesus is, I think, alluding to this point of here's what it takes. It takes humbling oneself. As we see in Paul's letters to the Philippians, he learned through humility by becoming humble. And it doesn't get more humble than coming from all power and position to a helpless baby. And then walking the walk, walking with the village, reaching out. And he's been modeling up to this point. They've watched him stop when he sees something. Stop and do something. Often reaching out and touching the untouchable. Often acknowledging the offensive to those around him and lifting up those who are on the outside. So this child that he's holding is a reminder that God's self, emptied God out and came and started not walking among us, but learning to walk among us and modeling that walk among us and showing us what this looks like, showing us what God intends for God's kingdom and for God's people in that kingdom. Because God was willing to become human, it shows that for God, greatness is not about separation. It's not about unilateral power, like we talked about the other week. It's about solidarity. It's about relationship. So it's not about self-adulation, but about empowering and encouraging all of those with whom we have created a relationship. Jesus shows us that greatness is not determined by great power. Greatness is determined literally by weakness and vulnerability, by service and by sacrifice, by humility and honor, by truthfulness and faithfulness. And I think that would fit in a tweet. Amen.